Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today in this Yoga for Back Pain webinar. I hope that you walk away with some tips and tricks, or maybe one or two poses that you can integrate in a day-to-day practice. Back pain is extremely relevant in our culture. As soon as we, transformed into sitting at desks and having a lot more technical jobs that require a little bit more brain work as opposed to physical labor work, it just started to change, how our body manages those longer periods of time. And then for those who maybe are in the labor industry, you're more likely to potentially run into injuries or some sort of spinal compression after you've been doing that type of work for a long period of time. So does it seem like, so this is a question, does it seem like we could ever really avoid back pain? And I think that the answer to that really lies in our daily habits, right? If we are preparing our spine or maybe taking time to decompress any compression that has accumulated, then perhaps we could be managing back pain. But there are always accidents and traumas and things that we can't necessarily avoid that it could influence the health of our spine. So with all of that said, just keep in mind that there are a couple different contributors to back pain. There can be just very common trauma. So if there's a particular incident that maybe caused some compression or a herniated disc. And I'm going to show you a visual that kind of, displays what's going on when you face that kind of problem. But ultimately, that could easily cause back pain or even some sort of, compression. Pinched nerves often come just from long-term habits creating compression in the spine, which could then lead to things like sciatic. And sciatic pinched nerve will generally affect the leg. You might feel a shooting or sharp pain down the back of the leg. Regardless of what might be causing your back pain, I just want to encourage you to be very mindful as we move forward in our practice today. Some general things to keep in mind is that if you feel any sharp or shooting pain, it's time to back off and potentially not practice that pose or position. A lot of the things that we're going to be practicing today are very, very minimal in effort, and we're not going very, very deep into the form of things. Instead, we're focusing more so on isometric pressure and how we might be squeezing our legs or how we might be shifting our feet. And so they're really just smaller details that we're trying to tune into with the structure in very accessible and achievable poses and postures. So we're not doing anything too in depth today, but just be mindful and tune into your spine if it is telling you that something is not right. Through the class, we're going to kind of start standing to create a foundation of what we're practicing internally in the poses. And then we'll start shifting to the floor and we'll end class in some poses that are essentially meant to be quick fixes. And so that means that if you find yourself in a really painful or tense situation and you need some immediate relief, then the poses at the end of the class are going to be what you would go to. And I'll go ahead and mention that as we get to them, but that'll generally be the flow of what we dive into. So as we practice these various poses, I would encourage you to pay attention to which ones might give you some more relief. Maybe it's not just one pose. Maybe it's a certain practice or point or isometric pressure that you're doing in your body throughout a couple of poses that gives you relief. Again, I don't think back pain can be solved or managed simply by avoiding pain and avoiding life and avoiding the things that might come up that we have to do for work. But instead, it really comes down to our day-to-day habits. So if you can just practice yoga or one of these poses for a minute to a minute and a half per day, and then stretch that out on a longer time frame for months, maybe even years, that's when you're going to start seeing some benefits. And that's when you're going to start seeing some resilience in your body to manage that back pain long term. So ultimately, we're in this for the long haul. Today's practice is all about feeding that long-term goal of being pain-free. It might not happen overnight. Hopefully there's a little relief that might happen overnight, but the truth is it is going to take a little bit of a longer term practice. Now, with all of that said, I do want to show you guys a little bit of a visual before we get started so that you can see how the spine is pulled together and put some terms to different things so that you're aware of what we're talking about. So this is an up close visual of an area in our spine. Specifically, this is what we're wanting to look at is how we have the vertebrae, which are the bones of the spine. And these vertebrae stack on top of one another. And that ultimately, as you feel the knobs on the back of your spine, or if you've ever put your hand down somebody's spine, that's the hard part that you're most likely feeling. Now, there is a little squishy piece between those vertebrae. It acts essentially like a cushion, and this is called a disc. The disc is pretty sensitive to pressure, but it is what gives us our ability to move the spine. So if you were to, round your back and kind of slouch into your tummy, and then if you were to maybe extend your chest and lift your chest up, right, the ability for your spine and those bones to move is because of the discs. There are a lot of nerves weaving through the spine as well. As you can see in this visual, it's almost this incredibly intricate weaving of the vertebrae in through the spine. Now, the interesting thing about nerves is that only 10% of your nerves actually feel pain or will trigger an experience of pain in your brain. The other 90% of the nerves are connected to different organs and muscles. And so once we start feeling back pain or we start feeling pain in some sort of area based on our back or some sort of compression in our spine, it's kind of interesting to think that, well, if I'm feeling pain and only 10% of my nerves can feel pain, then what's happening to the other 90%? If we've already gotten to the point of pain, most likely something else is being compressed or influenced. So I think that that's very important to consider and think about. Another thing that I wanted to show you is how there are different nerves throughout the spine that are going to influence different areas of the body. As I mentioned, 10% are going to be receiving pain sensations in the brain. The other 90% are connected to different muscles and organs throughout the body. So this visual gives a great little list of where different nerves might influence different areas of the body. So if you have some compression in your neck, you might start to experience it from, basically the arms up, arms, chest up. However, the thoracic spine, that middle of the spine, is connected to the chest muscles and abdominal muscles. Then you have the lumbar spine, that green portion of the spine in this visual, that is connected to the leg muscles. So this is where there's often compression that might lead to sciatic pain, that shooting of pain down the back of the leg or just tension in the back of the leg. It's often usually sourced into the spine and the nerves in the spine. So we might think, oh, I have pain in my leg. It's my leg that's the problem. But interestingly enough, this is crazy how nerves work, right? The actual source of the pain is from the back, from the lower spine. And then you have the sacrum, bowels, bladder, and sexual function. So if you start noticing other adverse symptoms that come up from back pain, you might see it in these different areas. But there are also times you might have no idea that it's even happening. Again, only 10% of those nerves weaving through your spine are actually able to receive and experience pain. So with all of that said, we're going to go ahead and get started for today. What you're going to need is a block, potentially 2 blankets, and you're also going to want some wall space, or a chair can be used as a substitute if you don't have any wall space. You won't necessarily need both, so it can be one or the other. We are going to go ahead and start standing, but again, be mindful and be discerning as we start diving into these poses. And if you ever have any concerns or questions, I want you to feel free to reach out to me after you watch this class, and we can start a running dialogue about things. And I'm happy to help build some discernment around a practice that might work best for you. So, a couple blankets, a block. I'm using a mat just for stability. It might not be totally necessary for you today. And then some wall space or a chair. We're going to start standing, and you're also going to want to have a block nearby. So, what we're going to do is actually bring our block in right by our feet. We're going to turn it lengthwise so that there's more space between the feet. Then, as you bring your feet to kind of hug that block, what I want you to do is essentially have your heel and your inner ankle on that outer side of the block, and then the toes turn in slightly. So it almost feels like you're pigeon toed just a little bit. If you're using hardwood floors or you have tiles on your floor, you can actually use the lines on the floor under your feet. What we would like in the alignment is to have the middle toe draw a line straight back to the very center of your heel. If you don't have lines on the floor, then you can mentally start to envision this happening, this alignment happening. And again, just trying to line up that middle toe to the very center of the heel. We're holding the block between our ankle bones and our inner heels here. And go ahead and lift your toes up. You could just rest with the hands on the hips or letting the hands hang down alongside the waist. As you have your toes lifted and you feel your inner ankle and your ankle bone resting on the block there, just start to identify the pressure that you're feeling on your feet right now. On a more broad perspective, you might feel that there's more weight on your right foot or your left foot. You might be able to feel that there's a little bit more weight on the toe ball mounts, or maybe there's more weight on the heels. See if you can even that weight out from left to right, forward to back. Now, the whole time we're keeping the toes lifted here. Now, as we really start to bring some discernment to where the weight is on the foot, notice how you can feel the pressure across the toe ball mounts. When the toes are lifted, that big toe ball mount really protrudes, and you can really build some sensation in that area as it touches the floor. So feeling that big toe ball mount, maybe feeling the pinky toe ball mount. See if you can feel the entire outer foot pressing down into the floor. And as you really feel your heels, sometimes this area can feel very vague and maybe like a gray area. But see if you can feel if there's more pressure on the front of your heel, which would be near the arch of the foot, or is there more pressure on the back of the heel? We still want that big toe ball mount, pinky toe ball mount, and outer heel to be pressing down into the floor. One thing that's helpful to envision in your mind is almost like you're standing on roller skates, right? And roller skates have 4 wheels. So you can imagine those wheels being 2 wheels being under the big toe ball mount, pinky toe ball mount, and then one wheel being on that inner heel, while the last wheel is on that outer heel. So as you feel those 4 points on each foot, try to even your weight amongst them. As you take a smooth, steady inhale, go ahead and lift your chest just slightly. As you exhale, just bring the abdomen in just slightly. And so the belly button kind of resides back towards the spine. We don't necessarily need to grip the abdomen in, but it should feel as though the abdomen and the belly could draw back to help lift the chest up. As you press into your heels, notice if your hips are lifting back to the wall behind you, or if you can actually encourage a downward tuck of your hips. So we're wanting a slight downward tuck of the hips, abdomen draws in and helps lift the chest up. Trying to hold this posture here is an isometric pressure. We're contracting specific muscles in different areas, and we're really just holding them. We might not feel any major lengthening or contracting in any muscle in particular, but instead it's just this general structure, this general support that we're starting to feed into our spine. As you take a nice, smooth, steady inhale and exhale, not only are we attempting to hold that posture, but see if you can soften the face and soften the eyes while you're standing there for the next few moments. Now we're going to add into this. We have a little bit more attentiveness to the pressure in the feet and what the feet are doing. Still those big toe ball mounts are still the toes are lifting off the floor right now. Now we're gonna add a little bit of a direction to the feet. And so what I mean by that is I want you to see if you can almost turn your feet in towards each other and the inner heels turn back to the wall behind you. What will happen is your feet might not totally move, but instead we're changing the isometric pressure in our feet. So our feet are pressing down into the floor. And if you could imagine turning your inner heel back and kind of spinning the inner heel out and around. So not only is the inner heel moving back, but now the outer heels are kind of trying to wrap forward. It almost feels like you're trying to spin and turn the toes towards each other here. And now as you do this, you're going to feel it's not just like you move it and then stop. We want that to be a constant sensation, a constant muscular influence, that there's the spinning of the inner heel back, spinning of the outer foot forward. Now we're going to reach our arms up and overhead in Urdhva Hastasana, or upward hands. As you take a nice, smooth, steady inhale and a smooth, steady exhale, keep the toes lifted, turning the inner heels back. We have that slight tuck of the tailbone as the abdomen draws in and up. You can bring your hands down, can relax the toes, and relax your feet. So even though it looks like we're just standing in a very simple standing pose, I hope that you can see that there's a lot of isometric pressure we can build into that. That's going to add some support to our spine. So now we're going to move the block out of the way. We're going to practice this without the block. The feet are about hip width apart, toes turn in slightly so that there's a straight line from the middle toe to the very center of your heel. As you lift your toes up, shift your weight evenly between your big toe ball mount, pinky toe ball mount, inner heel, and outer heel. Now with the toes lifted, see if you can spin that inner heel back. And as it spins back, notice how that outer heel kind of spins forward. And so it's almost like we're trying to twist off jar lids with our feet. Inner heel turns back, standing up nice and tall. So you take a nice deep exhale, abdomen draws in, tailbone tucks down to the heels. Notice how your weight is distributed from the front of the foot to the back of the foot and from left to right. Start to take notes on your body. Notice if you have more weight on your right foot. Notice if you have more weight on one heel more than the other. And then you can go ahead and relax. Now we're going to shift into a different pose called Parsvottanasana. I'm going to turn sideways so that you guys can see, and then we're going to practice this together. So I'm going to start with my feet hip width apart here. I'm going to bend my knees slightly, and then I'm going to just step one foot back about a foot. This pose is traditionally practiced with about 3 feet of distance between each heel, but we're going to start with a very minimal distance to really grasp this isometric pressure that we just learned. So it's the exact same, we've just shifted the feet in a different way now. So let's go ahead and come into this together. And one note also, as you come in and out of shifting the feet, helping with a little bend in the knees can help keep you stable through that process. You're also welcome to come to a wall and stand near a wall if you feel like that might be a little more stable for you. So we'll start standing in a pose called Tadasana, which is mountain pose. Here the feet are hip width apart, and we have that same alignment of the middle toe coming in line with the very center of the heel. Giving a little bend to your knees, go ahead and step your right foot back about a foot. Now, both the toes are still pointing forward. We're still trying to keep that alignment of the middle toe coming in line with the very center of the heel. And when we do this, what you might start to feel and tune into is that there is a pretty distinct internal rotation of the legs. And that means that it feels like the legs are turning towards each other. If your legs were rolling pins, they'd be turning in towards the midline of the body, they'd be turning in towards the center. This is an internal rotation of the femur bone or that big thigh bone. And this actually happens in the hip. And it can be quite helpful to relieve some back pain that's specifically in the sacrum. If you feel unbalanced, you can always take your front foot and step it out a little bit more to the side. And as you take a smooth, steady inhale and exhale here, just standing with the legs in this position, first reflect on what you notice. What are the more noticeable sensations in your legs or your spine or your body? Here, we're not really doing very much. Now I want you to go ahead and lift your toes off the floor and think about what we just practiced in Tadasana. First, we started by feeling those 4 points of the feet or the roller skates. Notice how your weight is dissipated amongst the big toe ball mount, pinky toe ball mount, inner heel, and outer heel. Now that we have one foot back slightly, you're most likely going to feel more weight on that foot, and that's okay. But just see if you can even out that pressure across the 4 points of each foot. Now, as you think about turning and spinning the inner heels back, how does that change your pose? Now, we're going to add on to this. Not only are we turning and spinning the inner heels back of both feet, but now I want you to see if you can pretend that you're trying to slide your feet towards each other. So here's another isometric pressure. The feet won't move in space, but instead I want you to think about actually trying to squeeze the legs so that you're as if you're trying to bring the feet back together. Now notice how that changes your pose. Now already we have quite a bit of things going on. If these are things that you have not done before, sometimes it can feel like a lot. If we're getting to know our body and we're still building that body awareness, there's a lot of new sensations that might be coming up. So the toes are lifted, we feel the weight on the four points of each foot, inner heels are spinning back, and now we're trying to squeeze the legs together as if we're trying to stand on both feet. Standing up nice and tall, reach your arms up and overhead. Taking a smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale. And then you can bring your hands down, little bend of the knees, and step the feet back into alignment with each other. The feet are hip width apart, just to create some space in the hip joint, hip girdle, and also in the low back is really our intention with this. So now we're back in Tadasana. Once we're in those resting points between yoga poses, you can kind of feel any residual effect that might come up. But ultimately, what we've been practicing is really a structure, a muscular structure that we're trying to integrate, and we want to practice regularly to help support the spine and help support the vertebrae. So now we're going to do the other side. So as you bend your knees slightly, go ahead and step your left foot back about a foot. It's about a foot of space between each heel. We still want that alignment of the middle toe, drawing a line back to the center of the heel. Again, if you feel unbalanced, use the wall. You can always have some more space between the feet. So you would step your front foot out to the side a little bit more. As you come into and just rest, right? We're not really doing anything muscularly at first. Just observe the natural tendencies of the body. And I want you to start by lifting the toes. Notice how that just right off the bat changes the weight amongst the 4 points of each foot. As you even that weight, then try to turn the inner heels back. outer heel forward. So we're trying to, again, we're trying to spin the heels here, spin the feet. But because there's so much pressure on the floor, they're not physically going to move very much. You might see them move a little bit, but they won't completely change their position on the mat. You should feel instead more of a muscular engagement in the feet, in the ankles, in the legs. Notice how as you start to turn those inner heels back, that we get that same internal rotation happening in the legs. If your legs were rolling pins, they'd be turning in towards the midline or in towards each other. Now we have that third point that we're adding into this particular pose, which is trying to slide the feet back towards one another. So that front foot is trying to slide back foot is trying to slide forward, all on top of spinning the inner heels back, weighing evenly on the 4 points of the feet. On your next inhale, reach the arms up and overhead and make sure that you're breathing. As you take a nice, smooth, steady inhale, nice, smooth, steady exhale, soften the face, soften the eyes. The abdomen does draw back towards the spine, and there's a slight tuck of your tailbone down towards that back heel. And then you can bring your hands down, a little bend of the knees, and step the feet back together. Awesome. So we're starting to build a little bit of receptivity to what's happening in the feet here. Now we're going to move into a pose called Prasarita Padottanasana, which is expanded intense stretch of the foot. For this pose in particular, I do recommend using some wall space or a chair. One big thing to be mindful of when we're dealing with back pain is that there are some scenarios where forward folds might be relieving, right? Especially it's this rounding that we're really wanting to be mindful of. But for the most part, that's not helpful. So we want to be mindful of keeping the spine straight. And if we are bending forward, we really want it to happen in our hips as opposed to happening in the abdomen or the belly. This is very, very important to be mindful of, especially when you have back pain. So to come into this pose, I'm going to demonstrate really quickly, and then we're going to practice together. What we're going to do is actually take our forearms here to the wall, and I'm standing quite close to the wall, but I'm going to step my feet wide. I'm going to bend my knees, and now I'm really wanting to bend here in my hips. It's not about getting to the floor. It's not about, folding as far forward as possible. What we're really trying to focus on at this point in time is keeping the spine straight as we come into this forward fold. So there's a lot more work happening in the hips here. I still have my knees slightly bent. We're going to add all those pressures in the feet that we've been talking about so far. And then if you can maintain that while you straighten the legs, awesome. If not, it's okay to keep the knees bent slightly. And then to come up, we're going to heel toe step the feet together. If you feel unstable doing that, you can always shift your weight towards your arms against the wall and just step the feet in and then push yourself up to stand. So we'll take our time coming in and out of this, being mindful the entire time. So to start coming into this, we're going to bring our forearms to the wall, elbows are bent. Then I'm going to step my feet back just slightly, about 2 to 3 feet. Then go ahead and take your feet wide. We want it to be wider than the hips. You're going to have about 2 to 3 feet of space between the heels. So we want to start where it's attainable. Even if your legs can go wider, that's okay. We really want to just first get introduced to these new feelings in the feet and in the legs, these isometric pressures. Now already take note if your spine is rounding. Right? Notice if you're bending in the abdomen. As you give a little baby bend to your knees, try to actually lift your sit bones and your hips, the very bottom of your hips, up towards the ceiling. Your sit bones are the base of the pelvis. If you've ever had a young kid sit on your thigh or sit on your lap, you might feel their bony sit bones on your thigh. And that's what we're wanting to actually lift up towards the ceiling here in our own bodies. So knees are slightly bent here. We're leaning forward. Spine is nice and straight. Now notice what's happening in the feet. Lift your toes up. Align the middle toe to the very center of your heel. And as you weigh evenly into the 4 points of your feet, notice which area tends to hold more weight. Now we're going to add that spinning of the inner heels back, spinning of the inner thighs back. And just like we kind of practiced in that last pose, we want to squeeze the feet towards each other. Notice if one leg has an easier time doing this over the other. As you do this, take a nice deep inhale, nice deep exhale. Keep lifting the sit bones up. And then as you exhale, belly button in towards the spine, slight tuck of the tailbone. So I've almost given you 2 separate instructions with the pelvis. There's lifting the sit bones up, but we also don't want that to cause the belly to drop to the floor. Instead, we're gonna draw the abdomen in and up to really support the lumbar spine specifically. So we're trying to get some deeper rotation in the hips without sacrificing some support in the lumbar spine. And you can push yourself up to stand, step the feet together, and stand nice and tall. Now we're going to move into a pose called downward facing dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana. We are going to use some wall space here for this pose. I'm going to demonstrate and then we can do together. So we are going to start on our hands and knees, and ultimately we're going to place our hands in a check mark position. So if you were to spread your palm away from your thumb, you kind of get this L shape, right? But it also acts like a check mark. We're going to do that with both hands. I'm going to demonstrate and then we'll do together. We're placing this against the wall here. The wrists are slightly forward from the shoulders, knees are slightly back from the hips. Curling my toes under, and then I'm going to lift my hips up. Adho Mukha Svanasana, or downward facing dog. Now here I'm keeping my heels lifting off the floor because I really want to get my hips lifting up towards the ceiling and the spine straight. We'll work with bending the knees slightly and trying to integrate a lot of the pose or a lot of the isometric pressures we were just practicing, but here in a different relationship to gravity. The head is just hanging, and then we'll come down. You can rest on your hands and knees, or if you feel comfortable trying this, you can always sit back on the heels and lean forward. Just be mindful not to severely and intensely round the back in this position. You really want to have enough support so that you can keep the spine straight or as straight as possible. So it really comes down to depth in the hips, really comes down to hip mobility to comfortably be in this position and really get some relief from it if you have back pain. This is not necessarily something that you want to practice if you have a herniated disc. You have to be mindful because sometimes it can cause more aggravation, but for other people, it can cause some relief. So just be discerning with yourself and your particular body. So let's go ahead and practice this together. Downward facing dog. We're going to spread our hands into that check mark position, place them up against the wall. The knees are hip width apart. You'll have your wrists slightly forward from the shoulders, knees slightly back from the hips. And then curl your toes under and lift your hips up. Now we're keeping the heels lifted. Go ahead and let your head hang. Bend your knees in towards your chest just slightly. Now try to lift your hips up. So here we're trying to make a nice straight spine. As you lift your hips up, press into your hands. You should feel as though that space from your tailbone all the way to your fingers kind of mimics a slide. It's a straight downward line. Now notice what's happening in your feet here. You're really only going to have pressure on your toe ball mounts, But see if you can turn your inner heels back, inner thighs back, and then squeezing the feet together. So again, we're not necessarily trying to pull the heels in towards each other. Instead, you want to turn the heels out. So inner heel shoots back and out. And as you squeeze the feet together, it really is more work in the hips. It's a little bit more work happening in the thighs here to actually make that happen. And let the head hang. Hands press down, hips lift up, inner thighs turn back. You can bend your knees a little bit more. You're almost trying to squeeze the thighs together here. And then come down to rest. You can just rest on the hands and the knees for a moment. We're going to do that one more time. If you have any pressure in the hands or if there's any major pressure coming up in the neck, you can also practice this with your hands up on the wall, and you just won't step back as far. So if you are practicing this check mark position of the hands against the wall, go ahead and come back to that position, spreading the fingers or the thumb and the index finger, placing it against the wall. Wrists are slightly forward from the shoulders, knees are slightly back from the hips. Curl the toes under, lift your hips up. Feet should be about hip width apart, maybe even a little bit wider if you have some significant back pain. So your feet could be as wide as the mat, a little bit wider than the hips. And bend your knees, squeeze the thighs together. As you press your hands down, lift the hips up. So the entire time we're keeping our knees bent slightly, thighs squeezing together. And then come down to rest. I'll just recommend resting on the hands and the knees. You can even come to sit back on your heels. The next poses we're going to practice, we're actually going to lay down for. So we're going to start laying on our stomach, and then we're going to roll over to our back. When we start laying on the stomach, we don't need any wall space. You can watch here for a moment, and then we'll do it together. We're just going to start laying down, and we're actually pointing the toes back. So you want to have enough space away from the wall to be here in this position. We're actually going to take a few breaths in this position. You can either rest your head on your arms, or you can have a blanket nearby. And then we're going to actually take our hands, lace the fingers, and we're going to place it onto the back of the head. And so again, this is where a blanket underneath the head might be a little bit more comfortable for you. Just taking a few breaths here, and then we'll move into a little baby back bend pose where the hands are along the sides of the chest. Elbows are pulling the shoulders back and away from the ears. Just taking a few breaths here, and some of you might feel even comfortable lifting the chest up slightly. But nothing crazy. We're really just trying to get some of these isometric pressures now in the upper back, upper spine with these particular poses. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this together. You're going to start coming down on your abdomen, on your stomach. Toes are pointing back to the wall behind you. And then you can rest your head on a blanket or on your forearms. And as you take a few breaths here, just observe what's happening in the back, what's happening in the spine. See if you can press the tops of your feet down into the floor. And as you take a nice deep exhale, try and lift your belly button off the floor. Tailbone down. Again, the belly button lifts from the floor. Back of the spine, base of the spine, and the pelvis actually tucks down to the floor. So we're really shifting our whole pelvis as we do that to support some length in the low back. This is a constant action, so it can be quite a bit of effort for long periods of time if this is not something that you practice regularly. Again, tops of the feet are pressing down. Abdomen lifts off the floor, tailbone tucks down to the floor. Smooth, steady inhale and a smooth, steady exhale. Notice if your face is getting tense or tight as you do these things. Now we'll lace the fingers together, bend the elbows, and you can just bring your hand kind of holding the back of the head or the back of the neck. You press your elbows down into the floor and just squeeze them slightly. Try to pull your shoulders away from the ears. Now we're adding a little bit more awareness and muscularity into the upper back, trying to create some space in the neck. Now try and do all of these actions at once. So overall, we have that tucking of the tailbone adds some length to the lumbar spine. But then as we also start to work with the shoulders now, we can have some space in the cervical spine or the spine in the neck. As you press the tops of your feet down, take a nice deep exhale. Belly button lifts to the spine as the tailbone tucks down to the floor. Using the pressure of your elbows, squeeze the elbows in slightly to pull the shoulders away from the ears. Taking a nice, smooth, steady inhale and exhale. See if you can do these actions all at once. And if not, that's okay. Just be aware of what one stands out to you the most or gives you the most support. Now, you're welcome to stay in this position if you feel like it's plenty challenging. If you feel like you have an understanding or your spine has been quite comfortable so far, and you can go ahead and bring your hands along the sides of the chest. We're still resting the head on some support here. And now we just have placed the arms in a little bit of a different position. Now, rather than pressing the elbows on the floor, we're squeezing the elbows together and trying to lift the elbows back to the wall behind us. Feel your hands pressing on the floor. And as your hands are pressing on the floor, try and slide them down towards your hips. Now, again, we're pressing so they won't move, but we want that isometric pressure and that muscular effort to happen as we press the hands down and try and slide them towards our hips. So notice as you do that, we're not dropping the shoulders forward. Instead, as the palms press down and try and slide towards the hips, we're lifting the shoulders up, creating some space in the neck. So you press the tops of the feet down, take a nice deep exhale. Tailbone is still tucking towards the floor. Now we want to prioritize that tucking of the tailbone towards the floor, but you're welcome to slowly curl the chest off the floor. Shoulders are lifting, but it all comes from this baseline isometric muscular pressure. Palms are pressing down, sliding back. Shoulders are sliding back. But notice what happened to the tailbone. What happened to the abdomen? Pressing the tops of the feet down, tucking the tailbone, and then you can come down to rest. We're going to do that one more time. So our goal here isn't to do this crazy, incredible back bend. Right? Our goal is to prioritize having space in the spine while we come into the back bend. So coming back into it last time for this pose, this is Cobra pose or Bhujangasana. We're going to press the tops of the feet down, turning the inner thighs up towards the ceiling. And as you take a nice deep exhale, tuck the tailbone towards the floor. Palms press down, sliding towards your heels. You're going to curl the shoulders back, but don't sacrifice that tucking of the tailbone. You can keep the gaze looking towards the floor, or if you want to look forward slightly, that's up to you. And then resting the head. You can just relax your arms for a moment. We're going to roll over to our side. So we're actually going to roll over to our back. So as you do this, try to keep your chest and your hips in line with one another. So you're not really twisting the spine as you do this. Instead, you're wanting to keep the chest and the hips all in line with each other as you do this. Now we are also going to want to be close to the wall. You don't necessarily need your mat for this. although it can be helpful if you're not familiar with a pose called bridge pose. So what we're going to do is, if you need to come up, you're going to roll to your side, come up, and then you can scoot yourself a little bit closer to the wall. What we'll do for bridge pose is have the toes up the wall, the feet are about hip width apart, and we still want that alignment of the middle toe in line with the very center of the heel. How close your hips get to your heels depends on the comfort in your knees. So if you can bring your hips all the way towards the heels and your knees are comfortable, awesome. If not, you can just have some more space. Just keep in mind that the toes are up the wall and the toe ball mounts are on the floor. Now, if you have your mat, you have a little bit of an advantage because you can hold on to the side edges of the mat. We're going to curl and tuck our shoulders underneath us. So as you turn your inner arm up, outer arm down, then we can tuck the shoulders. Now, if you're familiar with all of this, you can come in with me. If not, take this as a demo and then we'll come into it together. So from here, once the shoulders are tucked underneath us, we're just going to lift the hips up, taking a nice deep exhale, tucking the tailbone up towards the ceiling here. It's the little bridge pose. This is actually called the four-footed pose, or Chatushpadasana, but a lot of people call it bridge pose. And then we'll come back down. So the main thing is we get the shoulders tucked underneath us. There's a little bit more pressure on the shoulder as opposed to the neck, which is very important. So if you haven't come into this yet, and we'll go ahead and come into it together. Feet are hip width apart, toes are up the wall. You'll have the middle toe in line with the very center of your heel. And as you lay back, you can either hold on to the side edges of the mat, or you can even clasp your hands underneath you. But what you really want to prioritize is turning the inner arms up, outer arms down. And as you shift your weight from side to side, tuck your shoulders underneath you. As you press the elbows down, back of the arms down into the floor, then you can lift your hips up. But notice if you're lifting from your belly and if the buttocks is soft. And instead, see if you can take a nice deep exhale. And as you press into your heels, tuck your tailbone towards your knees. Avoid allowing the knees to splay out to the sides. Instead, try to keep the thighs squeezing towards each other. Taking a smooth, steady inhale and exhale, soften the face, soften the eyes. And then bring your hips back down to the floor. Now you can hold this pose for shorter periods of time and, focus on doing more of it for shorter periods of time. Or if your spine feels comfortable with it, you can hold it for an extended time period and maybe just do 1 or 2 per day. Again, as we go through these poses, think about which one is maybe giving you a sense of support or relief. Maybe it's not so much a pose, but perhaps a particular action that is a little bit easier to pick out in a different pose. So from bridge pose, we're going to take our legs up the wall. As you take your legs up the wall, this is when we're going to start getting into those immediate relief poses. Now we're laying on our backs with our feet up the wall. This is called legs up the wall, and this is a go-to pose for low back pain and compression. Usually we'll have the hips a little bit closer to the wall. Most likely about a fist's distance will be between the wall and the hips. But for today, we're going to keep ourselves pulled away from the wall a little bit because we are going to practice another pose after this, and this position is a little bit more advantageous. The legs up the wall as you take a few breaths here. It could be just nice relief for the spine to rest on the floor. It can passively lengthen along the floor without dealing with compression from gravity. You can rest in this pose as long as you please whenever you practice it. But for our class, we're going to go ahead and move into another pose before we come back to this. The next pose that we're gonna practice is a little bit of a it's gonna be a great one for those who are having pain from sciatica or even tension in the psoas muscle, which will also make the mid low back quite achy. So if you aren't familiar with this or have a hard time following along with me verbally, then you can watch for a minute and then we'll do it together. But I'll try to be quite clear so that you can practice it with me as I demonstrate. So we're going to bend the knees slightly, and the knees should be about above the hips. Then we're going to take one of our legs, specifically the left one, and we're going to bring the ankle to the right thigh. Now, right off the bat, this might be quite tense for someone, in which you can straighten your right leg up the wall. But what happens now is that left ankle is on the thigh, left knee is out to the side. Go ahead and flex your left foot. And we're still imagining as if we're standing on those 4 points of the feet. And so we're stretching out through the big toe ball mount, we're stretching out through the inner heel. And as you press your ankle against that opposite thigh, see if you can take your knee away from you. Now, we are not using our hands during this. We are very strictly using the muscles in the legs to create an external rotation in the hip socket. That means that that thigh bone or your femur bone is actually turning out to the side in the hip socket. Remember earlier in class, we were practicing an internal rotation of the thigh. Now we're practicing an external rotation. So again, that ankle, left ankle is pressing into the opposite thigh, and we're using that pressure to take the left knee away from us. Now you can choose how intense this is. If you start to bend your right knee or that foot that's on the wall a little bit more, you're going to notice that it takes a little bit more effort to press that left knee away from you. As you take a few breaths here, soften the eyes, soften the face. Then you can strain the right leg a little bit more so you have some space to bring that left leg back to the wall. And we're going to switch sides. So bottoms of the feet come to the wall. You'll take your right ankle to the left thigh. You can almost feel right above the outer ankle bone on that right leg is what's resting against your left thigh. And then you'll flex your foot. Imagine pressing into the big toe ball mount, inner heel. And while pressing that outer ankle against the thigh, try and lift your knee away from you. As you press the knee away from you, notice that external rotation sensation in the hip. So that inner thigh is turning out towards the side wall. You can decide if you want to intensify that stretch in the hip by just bending that left knee a little bit more. Still pressing the right ankle into the thigh, extending that right knee away from you. And you'll straighten the left leg slightly and bring the right leg back to the wall. We're going to do each side one more time. So left ankle comes to the right thigh. You press the ankle into the thigh, move that left knee away from you. Should all be an isometric pressure in the legs, so we're not using the arms. And if you feel comfortable doing so, you can go ahead and grasp your elbows with your arms and take your arms up and overhead. So the forearms are crossed, you're holding onto the elbows, and we're taking the arms up and overhead. And you can decide how intense that effort in the knee is, or excuse me, the effort in the hips is. You press that left ankle against the thigh, pressing the left knee away from you, lifting the chest up. And then we'll straighten the right leg. You can leave your arms up if you'd like. Both feet are at the wall. Last side, last time. We're taking that right ankle to the left knee now. You press that left, or excuse me, pressing the right ankle into the left thigh. Try to press that right knee away from you. With the arms up and overhead, notice if one side of your spine is longer than the other. With a little bit more attentiveness in your hips, see if you can lengthen the left and the right side of the spine evenly, all while practicing this effort with the hips. And then we'll straighten that left leg slightly, bringing the foot back to the wall. And now we're back to legs up the wall. You can bring your hands along the sides of your hips. Just take a few breaths here with your hands resting on the floor. We'll do a little experiment. As you turn your palms to the floor, just take a few breaths here and notice how that feels for you inside. Just having the palms facing the floor. Just observe not only any physical sensations that might come up, also notice any feelings or of, stability, support. Then turn your palms to face the ceiling. So now the backs of the hands are on the floor. How does this feel different for you? Sometimes there's sensations of openness or lightness. Now you can decide which one you prefer, whether it's palms facing the floor or palms facing the ceiling. And we'll rest there for a few breaths, letting go of any tension that might be holding on in the spine, shoulders, neck, or jaw. Place your hands on your abdomen. Take a moment to appreciate your body for all that it's done and all that it will do. Appreciate your mind for taking the time to harmonize with your body today. To come out, we'll slowly bend our knees. You can reach your right arm up and overhead and almost place your hand under your head. As you roll to your right side, try to turn your rib cage and your hips at the same time as to not twist the spine. And then you'll turn towards the floor, bringing your opposite hand down to support you as you push yourself up to sit. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of class, my intention was that you would walk away from class today with one pose or one isometric pressure note to continue to practice from here on out. It's not necessarily about having an hour-long yoga practice every day, but do see if it's realistic to integrate a minute, maybe 2 minutes of practicing something like this for an extended period of time. It's really once we get a practice building up over the course of maybe a month, 2 months, potentially a year, that we really start to feel the power of these little things that we do to hold ourselves upright. Remember, your spine is holding you through all kinds of pressures, not only emotional and psychological pressures in life, but just very physical pressures, whether it's our job, living, hanging out with family and friends, hiking, outdoor activities. But just by nature, we live under gravity, which is constantly pressing down on your spine. So at the very least, take home maybe legs up the wall or maybe inversions. Doing inversions with back pain can be a little tricky and do require support. So if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, please let me know. Reach out to me and I'm happy to talk more about it. But there's also inversion tables and things that are very supported that can help if you have back pain. So those are just little notes. For more information on that, feel free to reach out to me. I really appreciate you taking the time to practice with me today, and I'd love to hear from you and hear about your experience. If you do have anything else that I should be aware of, or maybe something caught your attention or didn't feel very good, I also would love to hear about that. With all of that said, I hope you have a great rest of your day and look forward to practicing with you again in the future.